Every night, after a lifetime of service and sacrifice, my wheelchair ramp had been my proud symbol of independence, a lifeline that allowed me to move freely and live with dignity as a 90-year-old veteran. For years, that ramp was nothing short of essential. But one crisp morning, I was stunned to find an official notice from the HOA, fining me for having it. According to their rules, my ramp supposedly violated exterior modification guidelines, a rule that seemed designed more to bully than to protect. As I stood in my doorway, reading the cold, impersonal language of the fine, I couldn't help but feel a surge of disbelief. How could an organization meant to support our community penalize a veteran for ensuring accessibility? My heart pounded as I snapped photos of the notice and began recording a video message, my voice a mixture of anger and resolve. I knew I had to document every moment because I sensed that something was about to change. Then, as the day wore on, a phone call came through that would alter the course of everything. A call so unexpected that it promised to shatter the HOA's oppressive grip. The details of that call, and what compelled it, remain shrouded in mystery even now. What could possibly have been so shocking as to force the HOA to back down? And why would a simple phone call from a 90-year-old veteran expose the very injustice behind the fine? I recorded every detail of that call, knowing that it would become the turning point in this battle. As I set up my camera to document the unfolding drama, I couldn't help but wonder, how far will the HOA go to enforce their absurd rules? And what will the contents of that shocking phone call reveal about the corruption behind these fines? Stay with me as I unravel the story, a tale of bureaucratic overreach, personal defiance, and a fight for dignity that promises to leave you questioning where justice truly lies. The day after receiving the fine, I woke up with a burning mix of indignation and resolve. I examined the notice again, its sterile fonts and legal jargon designed to intimidate, and began piecing together the first signs of a broader campaign. As I strolled through my front yard, a patch of earth I'd nurtured for decades, I noticed subtle alterations. A stray measurement mark here, a scribbled note on a fence post there. It wasn't just about my ramp anymore. It was about enforcing a uniform, soulless standard across properties that weren't even part of any HOA agreement. That morning, I contacted a few neighbors and discovered similar stories. One elderly woman recounted how she'd received a notice urging her to remove a modest modification meant to aid her mobility. The pattern was clear. The HOA was targeting independent homeowners who dared to prioritize accessibility and individuality over their cookie-cutter ideals. My phone buzzed with messages of disbelief from others who had also encountered arbitrary fines and baseless threats. Determined to fight back, I began documenting every detail. I photographed the fine, saved screenshots of threatening texts, and recorded my initial reactions. I even set up a temporary camera to capture any unusual activity near my property. The day's events confirmed what I'd suspected. This was not an isolated case of bureaucratic error, but a deliberate move to bully me, and others like me, into conformity. Then came a moment that sent a chill down my spine. As I reviewed the security footage from early that morning, I caught sight of an HOA inspector lingering near my ramp. His expression was cold and calculating as he jotted down measurements and made furtive glances toward my home. That silent act of surveillance felt like a prelude to something much larger. I realized that my humble ramp, a symbol of my hard-won independence, had become the catalyst for a battle that would test not only my rights, but the very notion of personal freedom. In the days following that fateful morning, the HOA's harassment escalated far beyond a mere fine. What began as a single notice quickly snowballed into a full-blown campaign of intimidation. I woke up one morning to find that my mailbox was once again inundated with additional notices. This time, the language was even more aggressive. One notice warned that any unauthorized modifications to my property would result in further fines and potential legal action. The words were cold and impersonal, a stark reminder that the HOA was determined to bend independent homeowners to their will. Later that day, I received a barrage of threatening text messages. One of them, terse and chilling, read, "Your non-compliance will not go unpunished. Fix it or face the consequences." The texts were accompanied by grainy photos of a black van parked near my home, a vehicle that seemed to materialize overnight. I felt the weight of every threat as my heart raced, and I immediately documented each message, saving screenshots and backing them up to my secure digital archive. As I continued to review the security footage from the previous night, I noticed something even more disturbing. In one clip, taken in the pre-dawn darkness, I saw an unfamiliar figure in a dark hoodie moving stealthily along the side of my property. The figure paused near my wheelchair ramp, as if checking for weaknesses, then disappeared into the shadows. The implication was clear. The HOA's intimidation tactics were now not only bureaucratic, but also physically invasive. Simultaneously, rumors began circulating among my neighbors. Several independent homeowners reported receiving similar fines, and even being visited by inspectors who meticulously measured their property lines and questioned the necessity of accessibility modifications. It became evident that my case was not isolated. The HOA was launching a coordinated campaign against those who dared to maintain their independence. Fueled by a mix of anger and resolve, I doubled down on my efforts to document every incident. I upgraded my security system with additional cameras and even set up motion detectors around the vulnerable spots on my property. Each new threat, each new act of intimidation, further galvanized me to fight back, not just for my rights, but for the dignity of every veteran and independent homeowner facing similar abuse. Just when I thought the HOA's relentless harassment had reached its peak, an unexpected twist turned the entire battle on its head. It was a drizzly afternoon, the kind where the sky is a muted canvas of gray, and I was reviewing the latest threats when my phone rang unexpectedly. My heart sank, expecting yet another intimidating message from the HOA. Instead, I heard a calm, steady voice on the other end. "Hello, is this Mr. Thompson?" the voice asked, using my last name with an air of formality that immediately caught me off guard. I answered warily, unsure of who could be calling at a time like this. The caller introduced himself as Congressman Rivera, a long-forgotten ally from my veteran days and a champion for disability rights. He explained that several community members had reached out with their own stories of unjust fines and discriminatory treatment, and that he had been quietly following the case. As he spoke, the tone of his voice conveyed genuine shock and indignation. "I cannot believe that a 90-year-old veteran is being penalized for having a wheelchair ramp," he said, his words resonating deeply within me. Congressman Rivera revealed that he had already initiated discussions with local authorities and disability rights advocates, determined to expose this blatant abuse of power. His message was clear. He would not stand idly by while my rights and those of countless others were trampled upon by an overzealous HOA. That phone call was a game changer. In one fell swoop, it shifted the power dynamic. No longer was I alone against a faceless bureaucracy. I now had a prominent ally ready to challenge the system. The call injected a surge of hope and galvanized my resolve. I immediately documented the details, recording the conversation, with permission, and noting every word he said. It became crystal clear that this was more than a petty fine. It was a systemic attack on the independence and dignity of those like me. With Congressman Rivera's support, I knew that the fight was about to take a dramatic turn, a turn that would force the HOA to reckon with the full weight of the law and public scrutiny. In the wake of that shocking call from Congressman Rivera, my entire outlook shifted dramatically. The reassurance in his calm, authoritative voice, affirming that my fine was not only unjust, but possibly illegal under federal accessibility laws, lit a spark within me that no amount of intimidation could extinguish. I immediately contacted my attorney, Dan Thies, and we scheduled an urgent meeting to update our legal strategy. Dan's eyes lit up when he heard the news. "This is the turning point we needed," he declared. With Congressman Rivera's support now in our corner, my case had suddenly become much more than a personal dispute. It was evolving into a fight for the rights of all independent, disabled homeowners. That afternoon, I bolstered my digital archives by adding a detailed summary of the call. I meticulously recorded the time, the congressman's name, and his assurances, and backed up the information on secure, encrypted drives. I also shared the news with local disability rights groups, urging them to rally around my story and share their own experiences of similar harassment. Their responses were immediate and heartening, reaffirming that my struggle was part of a much larger, systemic issue. Emotionally, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I recorded a new video diary that evening, speaking candidly to my online community. Today, I learned that I'm not alone. We have a powerful ally who believes that our rights matter, and that we deserve to live with dignity. I described how the congressman's call transformed my fight into one that could finally challenge the oppressive practices of the HOA. Simultaneously, I organized a small informal meeting with fellow veterans and affected neighbors. As we gathered on my back porch, the collective support was palpable. Stories of similar fines and invasive inspections filled the air, bonding us together in our shared resolve. Every conversation reinforced my determination. I would document every incident, adapt my strategy, and push forward with the backing of not only the law, but of a community united by the same cause. With every step I took that day, I felt more empowered and ready to confront the next phase of this battle. The support from Congressman Rivera had given me the courage to adapt and fight back, not just for myself, but for every independent homeowner whose rights were under siege. Just when I began to believe that my case was solely about an unjust fine and a crucial phone call, additional challenges emerged that widened the scope of this battle. One chilly morning, as I was organizing my digital files, I received an anonymous letter, different from the official notices. This flyer, hastily printed and scrawled in uneven handwriting, warned me that my property was only the beginning of the HOA's crackdown. Its tone was ominous and personal, suggesting that my struggle might be a small part of a much larger campaign. Within days, word spread among my neighbors. I learned that several other veterans and elderly residents had been similarly targeted. Mrs. Delgado, an 85-year-old widow who relied on a modest ramp for her mobility, told me she'd been handed a notice threatening fines if she did not standardize her property according to the HOA's strict guidelines. Another neighbor, Mr. Carter, recounted seeing an inspector taking meticulous measurements of his front yard, a property modification that had always been a personal touch rather than an eyesore. As these stories accumulated, I turned to an online forum dedicated to independent homeowners. There, members shared their own instances of arbitrary fines and covert inspections. Some reported receiving suspicious text messages urging them to conform or be punished, while others noticed unmarked vans parked near their homes at odd hours. The emerging pattern was clear. The HOA's campaign was not isolated to my case, but was a coordinated effort to enforce a homogenized aesthetic at the expense of personal freedom. To complicate matters further, an anonymous email from a former HOA board member surfaced. The message detailed internal dissent, revealing that several board members had privately questioned the aggressive tactics, fearing that such actions could lead to legal repercussions under federal disability laws. This insider account not only validated my own experience, but also hinted at a potential shift within the organization. Every new piece of evidence and every shared story deepened the narrative. This was no longer just about my wheelchair ramp. It was a broader assault on the rights of the most vulnerable homeowners. The stakes had been raised, and I knew that exposing these subplots would be crucial in galvanizing our community's resistance. As the relentless pressure from the HOA mounted, the emotional toll on me became undeniable. Late one night, after updating my online forum with the latest threatening messages and graffiti photos, I received a tearful call from a fellow veteran, Mr. Harris. His voice, heavy with a mix of fear and frustration, recounted how he too had been fined for having a wheelchair ramp installed, an essential modification for his mobility. Listening to him, I couldn't help but feel a deep kinship and shared anger. Here we were, men who had served our country honorably, now being penalized for prioritizing accessibility and dignity. In the solitude of my study, surrounded by my meticulously organized evidence, I allowed myself to confront the emotional weight of the situation. I recorded a raw video diary, speaking candidly about the sleepless nights, the anxiety that gripped me every time a new notice arrived, and the crushing disappointment of being treated like an outlaw for something as fundamental as mobility. Every knock on my door, every cryptic threat, it feels like a personal attack on my independence, I confessed, my voice wavering with both sorrow and defiance. At the same time, I joined a virtual support group for independent homeowners facing similar harassment. In these online meetings, we exchanged stories, comforted one another, and even shared laughter over the absurdity of it all. One session, an elderly woman tearfully described how every message made her feel like she was being forced to apologize for simply living her life. These interactions, though filled with vulnerability, strengthened our resolve. We realized that our struggles were interconnected, and our collective voices could amplify our fight. Despite the emotional strain, I began to see that our shared pain was also the catalyst for our unity. Each heartfelt conversation, every piece of empathetic advice from a stranger or neighbor reaffirmed that we were not alone. It was this blend of raw emotion and community support that fueled my determination to document every incident meticulously, knowing that our story was bigger than just one fine. It was a fight for dignity, justice, and the right to live independently. Just when I thought the HOA's harassment couldn't intensify any further, a new wave of shocking developments hit me like a freight train. One chilly morning, as I stepped outside to tend to my garden, I noticed something disturbingly out of place. A series of fresh, aggressive graffiti tags splashed across the side of my ramp. The bold, angry script screamed, "Conform or be fined," and it was clear that this wasn't a random act of vandalism. It was a deliberate message from the HOA to break my spirit. Within hours of discovering the graffiti, my phone lit up with a flurry of messages from unknown numbers. One terse text read, "We see you and you're not alone in your defiance. Change your property or consequences will follow." The text was accompanied by a blurry photo of what appeared to be a dark SUV parked near my driveway, a vehicle that had not been there before. The message left me with an unsettling feeling, as if every move I made was now being watched. Later that afternoon, while reviewing footage from my newly installed cameras, I caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure pacing near the edge of my property. The figure, dressed in dark clothing and moving with a deliberate, almost predatory gait, paused right where the graffiti had been painted. I rewound the footage several times, but the image remained frustratingly indistinct, intensifying my anxiety about what further surprises the HOA might have in store. The escalation wasn't confined solely to physical intimidation. I discovered on an online neighborhood forum that several other independent homeowners had begun receiving similar threats. Anonymous flyers, threatening texts, even reports of unmarked vans lingering in the vicinity. The pattern was unmistakable. The HOA was not merely content with issuing fines and formal notices. They were now engaging in overt acts of intimidation designed to force compliance by any means necessary. Every new piece of evidence, the graffiti, the SUV, the shadowy figure, added fuel to my determination. I updated my digital dossier with every detail, knowing that these escalating tactics would be vital in proving the HOA's systematic abuse of power. The message was clear. If I continued to stand my ground, they would escalate further, and I was ready for whatever came next. As I continued compiling evidence, I began noticing a disturbing pattern that connected my ordeal to a broader conspiracy. Late one evening, while sifting through a trove of emails and digital documents, I discovered a series of leaked internal memos from a former HOA board member. The memos detailed discussions about standardizing property features across the neighborhood, and shockingly, they specifically mentioned penalizing accessibility modifications like wheelchair ramps. One memo even stated, "Non-conforming properties will be reformed to fit the community's aesthetic, regardless of personal necessity." This revelation hit me hard. It wasn't merely about a single fine imposed on my ramp. It was part of a calculated strategy to force independent homeowners into a uniform mold that served external financial interests. I cross-referenced these internal documents with reports from other neighbors. One elderly resident, Mrs. Delgado, shared that she had received a similar notice demanding the removal of her modest ramp, while another neighbor, Mr. Carter, mentioned unexpected visits by inspectors who measured his property with alarming precision. The pieces were coming together. The HOA's actions weren't random. They were systematic, aimed at transforming our properties into a homogenized portfolio that would boost market values for a shadowy group of developers. I updated my online timeline and digital dossier with these new memos, and even recorded a brief video log summarizing the connections. "They're not just fining us for our ramps," I said in the video. "They're targeting us so that every unique, accessible feature is erased in favor of a cookie-cutter image." Adding another layer, I discovered chatter on local forums hinting that some board members had privately expressed concerns about these tactics. One anonymous post claimed, "We're under pressure from developers to enforce rules that strip away personal rights, and if we don't comply, our jobs are at risk." The collective stories and leaked documents painted a damning picture of a system willing to sacrifice our individuality for profit. Every new connection deepened my resolve. It was clear that my fine was not an isolated incident. It was a small part of a much larger, profit-driven scheme. I knew that exposing these revelations would not only vindicate my rights, but also empower other independent homeowners to stand up against this systemic abuse. The mounting evidence and relentless intimidation finally forced our community into a public showdown. One brisk evening, a special town hall meeting was convened by a coalition of independent homeowners fed up with the HOA's abusive tactics. I arrived at the packed community center with my digital dossier in hand, every threatening text and every piece of damning evidence meticulously compiled over the past weeks. The room buzzed with tension as neighbors, veterans, and concerned citizens gathered, their faces set in determination. The council chair opened the meeting with a somber tone, acknowledging the widespread harassment affecting our neighborhood. He outlined the complaints: unauthorized fines, vandalism, and invasive inspections targeting basic accessibility modifications. As the atmosphere grew heavy with collective frustration, I was invited to speak. Stepping up to the podium, I recounted my ordeal with a clear, unwavering voice. I described in vivid detail the fine imposed on my wheelchair ramp, the hostile graffiti that defaced my property, and the covert surveillance that made me feel constantly watched. I projected screenshots of internal memos and photos of threatening flyers onto a large screen, each image reinforcing the systemic abuse by the HOA. "This isn't just about a ramp," I declared passionately. "It's about our right to live independently and with dignity. They're trying to force us into a uniform mold for profit, and we won't stand for it." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the audience as I laid out the timeline of escalating events. At that critical moment, a local council member demanded a formal investigation into the HOA's practices. The room erupted with supportive shouts, and the council officially pledged to launch an independent inquiry. The power of our collective voice forced the HOA's representative to step back, his earlier defiance replaced by uncertainty. As the meeting adjourned, I left the community center with a renewed sense of purpose. The confrontation had reached its critical point. Our united stand had forced local authorities to acknowledge our grievances and take action. Yet, deep in my heart, I knew that this public outcry was only the beginning of the next phase in our struggle. After the town hall meeting, I knew that the next step was to force a direct confrontation with the HOA. Determined to defend my rights and my property, I arranged an in-person meeting right on my front lawn, inviting a few brave neighbors and local community representatives. The air was crisp that evening as I set up chairs and a small table under the glow of my porch lights, a makeshift courtroom for our showdown. Before long, a sleek, unmarked van pulled up, and out stepped the HOA president herself, flanked by 2 inspectors. Their faces were a mix of defiance and unease, clearly aware that the stakes had been raised. As they approached, my heart pounded with both apprehension and resolve. I greeted them coolly. "I'm here to settle this once and for all. My property is my sanctuary, and I will not be bullied into conforming to your arbitrary rules." The HOA president opened with a rehearsed spiel about community aesthetics and maintaining order. I cut her off sharply. "My wheelchair ramp is a necessity, earned through decades of service, and it's my right to have it, not to be penalized for it. Your fines and threats are not only unjust, they're discriminatory." I laid out my demands clearly: an immediate retraction of all fines, a public apology, and assurances that no further harassment would occur. For a few tense minutes, there was a heavy silence as the inspectors exchanged nervous glances. One of them hesitated and muttered something about reviewing our concerns with their board. I pressed on. "I expect a formal, written response within 48 hours. Anything less will force me to escalate this legally." My voice was steady, echoing across the gathered crowd. A local mediator, present at the meeting, stepped in to urge calm, but I made it clear that my patience was exhausted. "I am prepared to take this to court and expose every instance of harassment, not just for myself, but for every independent homeowner who's been targeted by your tactics," I declared. After what felt like an eternity of standoff, the HOA representatives reluctantly agreed to review my demands with their board and promised a response within 48 hours. As they left, the atmosphere was charged with a mix of relief and trepidation. This direct confrontation had forced them into a corner, and the next 48 hours would be critical. The 48-hour deadline passed, and the atmosphere around my property grew unbearably charged. Late one stormy evening, as rain battered the windows and the wind howled like a warning, My phone buzzed with an urgent message. The HOA board had issued a final response. I hesitated, heart pounding, before opening the email. What I found was a hollow statement, filled with vague promises and bureaucratic jargon. No retraction, no apology, just empty assurances of a further review. Fury surged through me. This email was the final straw, a clear admission that the HOA was unwilling to honor my basic rights. I immediately forwarded the email to my attorney, Dan, who confirmed that we now had more than enough grounds to escalate the case legally. I gathered all my evidence, the threatening texts, photos of the vandalism, internal emails, and my detailed timeline, and prepared for the ultimate showdown. That same night, I set up a live stream from my backyard. Under the eerie glow of my porch light and the steady drum of rain on the roof, I addressed the camera with raw emotion. "This is it," I declared, my voice resonating with determination. The HOA's empty words only confirm their intent to bully us. I will not be intimidated any longer. I'm taking this to court, and I'm calling on every independent homeowner to stand with me. As my live stream gained momentum online, neighbors flooded the chat with messages of support. Local media began to take notice, and soon the story spread beyond our small community. The collective outrage and solidarity in that moment felt palpable, a powerful, unspoken promise that we would not allow our rights to be trampled by arbitrary fines and covert intimidation. I ended the stream by asserting that this final act of defiance was not just my victory, but a win for all those who had been targeted. With every piece of evidence and every supportive comment, the HOA's grip was crumbling. In that stormy, charged moment, I knew that the final blow had been delivered. The system of abuse was about to be dismantled by the force of truth and unity. The day of the final showdown arrived, and the atmosphere in the courtroom was electric with anticipation. I walked into a packed room where local media, fellow veterans, and independent homeowners had gathered to witness the culmination of our battle against the HOA's oppressive tactics. My digital dossier and every piece of evidence, photos of the vandalism, screenshots of threatening texts, internal emails, and the recording of that pivotal phone call from Congressman Rivera were laid out meticulously for all to see. As the proceedings began, my attorney, Dan, stepped forward with a calm authority, presenting our case with a clarity that left little room for doubt. I took the stand, my voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside me, and recounted every harrowing detail, how my wheelchair ramp, a symbol of my hard-earned dignity, had been unjustly fined, how the HOA's threats had escalated into outright vandalism, and how a shocking phone call had turned the tide by revealing that even law enforcement recognized the injustice. Every word was punctuated by the overwhelming evidence projected behind me. The turning point came when I played the video clip of the ramp defaced with graffiti, followed by the internal memo that exposed the profit-driven agenda behind these fines. A murmur of shock and anger ran through the courtroom. The judge's eyes narrowed as he scrutinized the dossier. "The evidence presented here is overwhelming," he stated firmly, his voice resonating throughout the room. "It is clear that the actions taken against you violate both your rights and federal accessibility laws. An injunction is hereby issued to immediately halt further harassment, and a full independent investigation into these practices will be initiated." In that decisive moment, as applause broke out among the assembled supporters, and even some of the skeptical officials nodded in agreement, I felt an indescribable surge of vindication. The oppressive shadow of the HOA's tyranny was finally being lifted by the force of truth and justice. Standing there amid cheers and supportive glances, I knew that this courtroom victory was not just mine. It was a monumental win for every independent homeowner fighting against arbitrary rules. The final showdown had not only shattered the HOA's grip, but had also ignited a spark of hope that would resonate far beyond these walls. In the weeks following our courtroom victory, a profound sense of justice and liberation swept over our community. My wheelchair ramp, a symbol of decades of service and hard-earned independence, was no longer a target of arbitrary fines, but a badge of honor that reminded me every day that I fought for my rights and won. Stepping back onto my property, I felt a renewed freedom, as though the oppressive weight of the HOA's overreach had finally been lifted. Neighbors began to share their own stories of harassment, and soon our collective voice grew louder than ever. We organized community meetings, where independent homeowners and fellow veterans discussed our struggles, celebrated our victories, and pledged to stand united against any future attempts to infringe on our rights. The support from local disability rights groups and activists only strengthened our resolve, proving that when we come together, we are far stronger than any bureaucratic bully. I continue to update my website and social media channels with every piece of evidence, every interview, and every moment of triumph from our battle. The story of how a simple phone call from Congressman Rivera, coupled with relentless documentation, turned the tide against a powerful HOA quickly spread, inspiring others who had faced similar injustices. Our experience became a beacon of hope, a testament to the idea that no one should be penalized for something as essential as accessibility. As I sit on my porch now, watching the sunset and reflecting on the journey, from the day I received that unjust fine to the final, resounding courtroom decision, I am filled with gratitude and an unwavering belief in the power of collective resistance. This victory is not just mine. It belongs to every independent homeowner who refuses to be bullied. Before I sign off, I want to ask you, have you ever been pushed to the edge by arbitrary rules or felt that your rights were being trampled by those in power? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might just empower someone else to stand up for what's right. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe, share this video, and join our community of resilient individuals who demand justice and respect. Remember, your dignity and freedom are non-negotiable. Stay strong, stay proud, and I'll see you in the next video.